and welcome, once again, to Frankly. Why am I in a freezing shed whilst Walter continues to blow the location budget on touring My Little Pony conventions?
Hey guys, I'm here at BronyCon, the last one in 2019. I get a lot of flack from Frank for thinking that I'm a horse. I just don't think he gets it, nor my equestrian tendencies. This is my persona. His name is Blaze Flame Fur. That's because of my red cloak, it's like fire, and fur because I'm a horse.
The second mystery I cannot address, nor can we resolve that of Walter's continued employment. Moving swiftly on, I would like to explain to you why I am still going on at you about the masterpiece of Pope St. Pius X, which is Pascendi, rendered in a Catechism on Modernism. It is a profound philosophical and theological defence of the basis of the Catholic religion, and its power to explain the crisis we inhabit today in church and state is practically unrivalled in anything else I have ever read. Today's chapter, which is called The Modernist as Historian and Critic, has a profound impact on our understanding of where the modern church is leading us, and it is leading us away from Christ. The point made in chapter 5 of a Catechism on Modernism is that the modernists are advancing an idea of religion that reduces the Christ of the Gospel of St. John to a fiction. Today's episode is on how modernism promotes Catholicism absent Christ. As with all these episodes, you can see a more thorough treatment of the subject of them on my Substack. This episode is evidenced in a post called Catholicism minus Christ, in which I supply all the references to the modern church and to Pascendi through a Catechism of Modernism that you will need to support the things I'm about to say. And what I'm about to say is in fact extremely spicy. Pascendi in a Catechism of Modernism is a difficult thesis to grasp. However, it will give you a thorough understanding of what the Catholic religion is, why it's true, how it shows its truths, and why indeed modernism is composed of errors which contradict it. Pascendi Dominici Gregis was the original encyclical of Pope St. Pius X in 1907. It roughly translates to "feeding my sheep," which recalls the injunction of Christ to the apostles to feed his flock and to tend his sheep. And that was the duty that Pope St. Pius X wished to discharge in writing it. In 1908, it was republished as a question and answer series to make it more accessible to ordinary Catholics, and this was published initially as a Catechism on Modernism. Later editions rephrased that as a Catechism of Modernism. I have been admonished for saying on and not of, and publishing pictures of when I'm saying on, so now you can see what I'm going on about when I talk about a Catechism of Modernism on Modernism. A Catechism on Modernism is in three parts. First, it talks about the errors of modernism, then it says where they come from, and then it says what to do about them. The videos so far have concentrated on the first chapters of part 1, the modernist errors. The first video talked about the religious philosophy of the modernists, and then the second talked about how the modernists have made a new religion basically composed of all the errors condemned by Pope St. Pius X. The third one looked at modernism as a religion of man. Next, we looked at the modernist idea of theology, and we saw how following the science became a modern religious cult, amongst other things. The modernist as theologian demonstrates that modernists will always argue for the priority of science, a merely naturalistic rule set of the world absent God. And this is the reason why science becomes worshipped in place of religion. The next video explained why political beliefs of liberalism has become the new religion. The state religion of liberalism is the religion of the synodal project. It celebrates the same things: climate cult, open borders, and the domestic colour revolution under the rainbow flag. Curious that these things happened in all Western nations at the same time, regardless of elections, is it not? And curious too that non-believers are punished like heretics by the law, and called extremists and nasty names, have their bank accounts removed and their lives ruined and so on. It's almost like it is a zealotic quasi-religious cult, is it not? But guess what? Pascendi predicted that as well. And it explained not only that it was going to happen, but how it happens. It explains the mechanics of how modernists construct a religion around modern man and his beliefs, and that this is where it inevitably leads into social chaos and total moral collapse. Modernists really believe that all religions are equally true or false. This may explain why the Vatican has recently once again endorsed Martin Luther and continues to approach paganism, literal paganism, as if it were simply another acceptable route to God. Well, it is an acceptable route to something if you find idol worshipping acceptable, but it's certainly not God. I don't think you need me or Pascendi to tell you that. The good news, of course, continues. Today's episode is on Chapter 5, which is a modernist as historian and critic, which all sounds rather dry. But what this explains to you is that the modernist point of view of the history of the church and the way it is criticised reduces the Christ of the Gospels to a popular fiction. That is to say, the destination of the modernist religion is a religion minus Christ. Christ just becomes a sensational experience to be enjoyed by people during their Catholic experience, which is of course an experience limited to the senses and the imagination and the perspectives of modern man. This recalls again the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, and this is explained in Chapter 5 as well, when it deals with a question once more of immanence, or vital immanence. Now, this is a concept that was popularised by Immanuel Kant in his extremely autistic philosophy of the 18th century. I mean, if you want to see why I describe it as that, perhaps you should go and have a look at a critique of pure reason and see how much pain it causes you. I mean, I've had more enjoyable visits to the dentist, and I've had quite a few visits to the dentist, I might add, given my unique form of customer feedback that I've received directly into my face on various occasions. Nevertheless, I persist in my mission to spread the bants, regardless of the personal and dentistry cost to myself. And I would remind you with caution to approach Immanuel Kant, because it's agonising. Kant's philosophy, his idea of immanence, was basically this, is that we can't know anything outside of our senses. All we can do is interpret our experience, which means we are locked in ourselves and we create the world, in a sense, out of the impressions that we get through our sense data and the interpretations that we place upon them. This is, of course, a comprehensive denial of the basis and nature of reality itself. But this is the state of modern metaphysics. Modern metaphysics isn't metaphysics. It doesn't explain the nature of being. It can't tell you why orange remains orange, or circles remain circles, or 2 + 2 remains 4, despite the political prejudices or enlightenment of the time, because it can't explain why these things continue, beyond saying that these are the best explanations we can come up with and we seem to happen upon them time and again. The Aristotelian and Thomistic point of view, of course, is that such principles endure over time because they are sustained by a thing that does not move or change, which is God. God is the still point. You'll find him in the 4 quartets of T.S. Eliot. You'll find him in Aristotle. You'll find him in St. Thomas. You'll find him in St. Augustine. But you won't find him in the modernist new religion. Because guess what? Everything changes there, and that's because it's all very modern. Because modernist view of history, as you find out in Chapter 5, is basically this, right? Guess what? Christ himself was wrong. As Pope St. Pius X points out, the logical conclusion of the modernist revisionism is that Christ was mistaken, so were all the holy books and the prophets and so on, because they didn't have the benefit of the modernist point of view. This is seriously the case that is made in Chapter 5. I warned you, it got very spicy. This is a book written in 1908, for goodness sake. How can it come with a 5 chili spice warning? But it does indeed. So what Pope St. Pius X warns you, writing in all capital letters, which was formerly known and cursed corners of the internet as cruise control for cool. It's a form of shouting in textual form. But nonetheless, he does, and he asks whether, does this mean that they dare to say that Christ himself was mistaken? And of course they do. And they say that about everything else that was written about the church and that was believed about the church, because of course the modernists suffer from what you might call liberal chauvinism, which is my name, I invented that, lol, for people who consider anyone who doesn't share their views to be stupid. So of course, if you're a modernist, you say, well, people before us, they didn't have the benefit of our perspective. They weren't as enlightened as us because of the enlightenment of people like Immanuel Kant, of course, who told you that reality wasn't real. It was all in your head, your senses. It's what you make of the world that matters. It's your truth. Follow your heart. That's what the modernists say, and that's why they're going on about it so much. About a person-centered religion, about being in love with love, about an integral humanism, about all those things that come out, about unity by basically jettisoning everything that distinguishes the Catholic faith from all the others, as we continually hear from Pope Leo XIV. This is a new religion. As I point out, and you can see my references in my Substack post if you like, it's not only radical tradicals such as myself who will tell you this now. Dr. William A. Thomas is a Vatican theologian. At the time of speaking, he is miraculously still employed by the Holy See. Why do I say miraculously? I would say that advisedly too. Dr. Thomas is a leading Mariologist, is the head of the John Paul II Fatima Centre, and holds various theological positions, including one for the Holy See, and is a leading theologian. What does he have to say about this? He says synodality is not the Catholic religion. It's a new religion. And it isn't a true one. I suggest you go and have a look at that interview on LifeSite News, which is headed Pope Leo's classmate says shocking things about synodality, or something like that, in which Professor Thomas explains to notorious religious extremist John Henry Weston why the synodal church isn't Catholic. And he would know. If you have any questions for Professor Thomas, I speak to him fairly regularly, and if you put them in the comments, I promise you I will put them to him personally, and I will relate your answers to him in the next video. The reason why I bring him up is to show you that it isn't just extremists such as myself and the infamous John Henry Weston who come out with things like this, but theologians who work for the Holy See have now noticed that the new religion is not the true religion, and that in fact it's packed full of heresies. Yes, heresies, actual ones. And how could we have predicted this? Well, this is the reason why I keep going on at you about Pascendi, because it predicted all this, how it would happen, how modernism would inevitably produce these outcomes well over 100 years ago. If you have a look at Chapter 5, The Modernist as Historian and Critic of a Catechism of Modernism, it will tell you that there are three principles of modernist philosophy that inspire its historical revisionism, and these are agnosticism, or the idea that God can't be known, transfiguration of things, if you like, the redefinition of terms that basically abuses their meaning and moulds them into new modernist ideas, and disfiguration, presenting a false image, not only of the religion and its beliefs, but of Christ himself. I briefly touched on the crippling autism of Immanuel Kant to show you how agnosticism is explained as a central tenet of the modernist idea in Pascendi. The reason why this charge is made is because modernist ideas are in fact very closely related and inspired by the philosophy of people like Immanuel Kant, who say the external world cannot be truly known, and of course that God remains a mystery beyond the direct comprehension of man. That is to say, we cannot know God directly by reason or revelation, which is a heresy. If you believe that, that leads to agnosticism, says a Catechism of Modernism, which is the idea that God cannot be known. We just can't know. You can say there is, you can say there isn't, but we can't know either way. And what that leads you to is, well, then we need some people to interpret our feelings, our experiences, what we claim to experience when we claim to experience God, what we feel when we are moved towards religion. And this is where you get a religion of feeling, of sensation, a religion of man, based upon the person. A person-centered religion, as we see in the apostolic letters of Leo XIV. This chapter Goes on to explain how this perception of history, how this modernist criticism leads to a sense of what's called a dual reality by Pope St. Pius X, wherein the modernist believes in a naturalistic and scientific explanation of history, but not a divine one. The end result of this is the reduction of the Christ of the Gospels to a fairy tale. In order to explain all this, Pascendi tells us that the modernists must do away with everything that's been established in the Catholic religion between the time of Christ and practically now. Some of it's used, as Pope St. Pius X points out, cleverly to present itself as a continuation of the early traditions of the Church. But what's actually happening, as Pope St. Pius X explains, is that everything is being distorted, transfigured, disfigured, changed, transitioned into a thing that is Catholic in name only, a church that identifies as Catholic. Pope St. Pius X reminds Catholics of where the true Christ is to be found. He says, "He is the Christ, for instance, whom we find in the Gospel of St. John." I would remind you that we began this video by telling you that Pascendi is basically titled Feeding the Flock, and it is in the Gospel of St. John, of course, where Christ reminds his followers to do just that. This is the reason, I believe, that Pascendi is titled what it is, because perhaps the most powerful message that we've encountered in it so far is the dangerous project of the modernists to reduce Christ to a mere fiction and to say that the Gospels are just another heartwarming story to experience. But the history of that is not only questionable, but not real, because it's unscientific, because it's not naturalistic. It reduces Christ to the status of an ordinary man. It just gives you feel-good vibes. What is the opinion of the modernists on the subject of St. John's Gospel? It is asked in chapter 5 of a Catechism on Modernism. The subject of St. John's Gospel, of course, is Jesus Christ. And the answer is, it is pure contemplation from beginning to end. A contemplation of the Gospels. This is what we're reduced to. Some kind of hippified spectacle in which Christ himself is gradually retired from the picture and replaced by an encounter group about feelings. Whose feelings? Father James Martin's feelings. And all the other people who are now welcomed under the rainbow banner. After this part, you see a further discussion of immanence, or vital immanence more strictly. The idea, basically, that man cannot know things beyond his experience of the world. He's trapped in himself, there's no direct knowledge of the divine possible, and so on. And therefore, if you really want to extend the concept, the very idea of objective reality and truth itself becomes unstable because it's all a matter of personal perspective and we're trapped in ourselves forever. This is a very modern idea. I would like you to entertain for a second the paradox that it's these modernists as well that tell you that man can be liberated without limits, moral limits, intellectual ones, personal ones, even ones of biology. He can just change his sex. This is what these people tell you. But at the same time, they believe in a philosophy that tells you that you're trapped in yourself without any possibility of escape forever. This is the reason, perhaps, why your entire culture has been a mass-produced, manufactured product secured by the political dominance of cultural production for over a century. That's how it's made to make sense, because practically everything we consume has been sponsored by people who make believe in these kind of nonsense. That's how they make you believe in it. They're manufacturing make-believe at mass scale. Takes a lot of money. Takes a lot of, if you like, education for people to believe in these things. And they do. But not forever. As we can see in Pascendi here, in chapter 5, what's explained to us is that the application of evolutionism to the religious idea basically ends in a sort of paradox. So the modernists are telling you that the religious idea must evolve because they believe in evolution and they apply naturalistic theories like evolution. And so, you know, it has to be interpreted and it has to change because of my beliefs. Now, you can see that today, people who tell you this about every single aspect of the political religion, they're telling you that you have to believe in it because these beliefs are better. And why are they better? Well, because we believe them to be better, and that's why we believe ourselves to be better than you. And so that's why you have to believe in it. And if you want to be better than what you are, then believe what we believe, because your beliefs are bad, because they're not our beliefs. So disbelieve them. The idea that there's an inexorable progress in beliefs, that beliefs naturally have got better, that this is the result of some process of resolution where the best argument wins, which is patently false. Nowadays, it's become obvious that this is patently false. The best ideas have not won, they've been sponsored. And they've been transmitted by people who've managed to weasel their way into positions of power where they can grab hold of the megaphone of public opinion and tell you that they are reality. Well, they're not, and they're contradicted by reality. One of the reasons why today people have such a tremendous appetite for the truth and for reality is because for 100 years they have been propagandized by lies into believing that reality isn't real, and whatever they're told to believe is real instead, which it isn't. Which comes to the basis of metaphysics. Metaphysics is fundamentally important, and it's explained throughout a Catechism of Modernism because it shows you the foundation of the nature of being and reality, whose ultimate source, of course, is the still point, which is God. God doesn't change. But the modernists do. What happens to people who might call themselves Catholics, who object to these changes? What happens to them? Are they welcomed into the new church in its spirit of welcoming others that it formerly condemned? No. No, surprise, surprise. It condemns no one these days except for people who believe in the Catholic religion. Yes. And Pascendi tells you something about this too. It says that the modernists will accuse Catholics of torturing texts to defend the Catholic religion. And Pascendi tells you, or rather Pope St. Pius X tells you, they are accusing the Church of something for which their own conscience plainly reproaches them. So, Pope Pius X predicted over 100 years ago that when you object to your religion being pushed aside for a new cult composed entirely of heretical errors, if you complain about this, you are told that you are torturing texts, that of course that you're rigid, that you're a bad person. You're not getting it. This, of course, is an example of a technique called confession by accusation. The people who are torturing the texts, indeed to death, are the modernists, of course. But what they're doing is they accuse you, faithful Catholics, of doing the same, saying you are the bad people. You are trying to twist the meaning of the Catholic Church, which existed for a very long time before the modernists came along, and now it must all change, of course, and so it's your fault for pointing that out. The Bolsheviks did this. They accused everyone of their crimes, and of course it's a common technique nowadays by people who are flagrant criminals at state level, but noticing this out loud can get you debanked, banned and even locked up. So, I'll leave that to your imagination. Pope Pius X even predicted that there'd be an international cooperation between modernists to try and destroy the church or replace it with their own mad modernist cult, prefiguring the Synodale Weg of Germany and its, if you like, symbiotic relationship with the Vatican, given that the Synodale Weg under the German bishops has basically produced a blueprint for the direction of the synodal project generally. It is obviously more extreme, it steps out in front, then the Vatican can then pretend that it isn't as extreme as the German bishops and then go along and do what it said anyway. It's the same thing. These are two ends of the same ship. The German synodal way, extreme as it is in its open advocacy of homosexuality and the ordination of women and so on, is simply the prow that breaks the wave. Meanwhile, astern, the wheelman in the Vatican, will occasionally do a bit of trimming, but they still chart the same course. The ship is not changing course, of course, because the synodal religion is the religion of the Vatican. And as we know from Professor Thomas, and as we know from Pascendi, the synodal religion is not the Catholic religion. It is a modernist litany of errors. How do the modernists defend this? What, in brief, is asked in a Catechism of Modernism, are their tactics towards those who defend or attack any of their novelties? Deny it, says Pope Pius X, and you are an ignoramus. Embrace it, defend it, and there is no praise too warm for you. And so there you are. If you want to get on in life, embrace evil. It's a great career move. Why do you think I have such a splendid collection of ladies' wigs? Well, because it's the only way of making a white religious extremist such as myself completely bulletproof. In summary, at the end of chapter 5, what does Pope St. Pius X say that all this produces? The question is asked. What has been the result of the domineering of the modernists and the thoughtlessness of those who have been imposed upon? The impudence and the domineering of some, and the thoughtlessness and imprudence of others, have combined to generate a pestilence in the air, which penetrates everywhere and spreads the contagion. Almost 120 years ago, Pope St. Pius X said that modernism in its contagion had poisoned the atmosphere of not only the Catholic religion, but had changed the climate of opinion around it as well. And this is true. And we can see over a century later how severe this contagion has become. The viral transmission of modernist errors is infecting Catholics worldwide, and it will inevitably lead them to despair of their faith, especially in a time when the liberal state religion is disappearing all around the Vatican. People no longer believe in it because its promises of paradise on earth have delivered a living nightmare. Instead of despairing of your faith, find out why you should never despair at all. Find out why it is a changeless, luminous guide to salvation. Read the spiritual and practical wisdom that is presented you as the hallmark of the true church in all of its faithful writings, such as Pascendi and the Catholic social teaching of Leo XIII. And above all, seek the grace of God and never despair, for despair is a sin, an implicit denial of the eternal hope of the still point that never changes, the Archimedean point of all in space and time, that is Christ himself. God bless you all, and I'll see you again next time.